It began with a sound, faint metallic, buried beneath 70 years of dust. Deep in the forests of Lower Silesia, a research team broke through a concrete wall, thought to seal nothing more than an abandoned mine. What they found instead were corridors lined with rusted pipes, frozen control panels, and a single steel door marked only by a faded eagle and the number 27. Inside lay records, blueprints, and fragments of machinery that had no place in 1945. For decades, it had been dismissed as rumor, whispers of a Nazi engineering project buried at war's end. But now, as the floodlights flickered on, the past began to breathe again. Chapter 1. Shadows Before the Storm. In the years before the world tore itself apart, Europe was a continent balancing on a knife's edge. The scars of the Great War had never truly healed. Cities rebuilt themselves on borrowed money and fragile optimism, while entire generations tried to forget the mud, the gas, and the silence of the trenches. Yet beneath the hum of recovery, something darker stirred. A hunger for power, for revenge, and for certainty in uncertain times. Germany, bound by the humiliations of Versailles, simmered in quiet rage. The streets of Berlin carried two faces: modern cafes alive with jazz and laughter, and backrooms filled with veterans, restless, angry, whispering about betrayal. In these rooms, a new kind of language took hold. Words like purity, destiny, and renewal. Adolf Hitler, a failed artist with a soldier's bitterness, learned to turn those words into fire. Each speech grew more precise, more dangerous. He promised not just change, but vengeance. And the crowd, weary of defeat, believed him. Across the borders, France and Britain watched. Not blind, but tired. They saw the marches, the symbols, the rising militancy, yet clung to hope that another war could be avoided. Memories of Verdun and the Somme were still too raw. No one wanted to tell their sons they might soon fight again. Politicians spoke of diplomacy, of peace through understanding, but history rarely listens to hope. Meanwhile, in the East, the Soviet Union rebuilt its might under Joseph Stalin's iron will. Industrial cities rose from frozen plains, powered by fear and labor. To the West, the United States turned inward, a nation more focused on recovery than confrontation. The oceans, once seen as barriers, became illusions of safety. The storm clouds gathering over Europe seemed, to many Americans, a distant problem. But in the factories of the Ruhr and the laboratories of Bavaria, engineers worked quietly under new orders. Projects labeled Reich Special Initiative began appearing in procurement lists. Blueprints without clear purpose, components requested in secret. A small circle of scientists, some veterans of the old chemical warfare programs, were summoned to secluded facilities, told only that their work was vital for Germany's new dawn. The details were buried under layers of classification, signed personally by men who would later vanish from all records. Ordinary citizens noticed changes in small, unsettling ways. New construction deep in the mountains, whole towns suddenly off limits, declared restricted zones, families relocated overnight. Rumors spread of massive tunnels being dug under the Owl Mountains of Silesia, supposedly for armament storage. But the scale was too vast, the secrecy too strict. People whispered about a project called WWII, giant. Few believed it then. Even fewer would survive to tell the truth. In the cafes of Warsaw, journalists debated what Hitler's rise truly meant. He'll never risk another war, some said. He's bluffing. But in the back rooms of the Abwehr, the German military intelligence contingency plans were already being updated. They weren't planning if there would be a war, only when. Then came 1938, the Anschluss. The Sudetenland, each conquest met with hesitation from the rest of Europe, and silence from those who might have stopped it. For the German people, it felt like destiny unfolding. For those inside the party's scientific branch, it meant funding, unlimited, unquestioned. Engineers and physicists found themselves tasked with building machines that defied conventional purpose. The Führer demands results, their orders said. You will not fail. In Silesia, under a veil of fog and snow, construction began on what would later be known as the Ries complex. Thousands of forced laborers were brought in, guarded by SS units. Blueprints disappeared into black files marked Geheimkommandosache, top secret command matter. The operation was buried not just in rock, but in bureaucracy. Even within the Reich, few knew its purpose. Those who asked too many questions were reassigned or erased. Outside, Europe drifted closer to catastrophe. Newspapers printed words like appeasement, guarantee, and non-aggression. The language of politics gave the illusion of control, but inside those hidden tunnels, beneath the mountains, the real preparations for domination were already underway. Experiments in propulsion, energy, and weapons far beyond their time. And somewhere in that darkness, men in lab coats took notes under the hum of floodlights. They believed they were building the future of Germany. None realized they were building its ghost. The world above carried on. Markets opened, radios played, children went to school. But beneath the soil of Silesia, the foundations of a secret war were already being poured, one that would outlive the Reich itself and wait silent for someone to find it again. Chapter 2: The Descent into Obsession. By 1939, the illusion of peace had shattered. The German war machine moved with precision and fury, swallowing Poland in weeks. Europe trembled. Nations that once believed distance would protect them now faced a brutal awakening. And yet, while soldiers marched and bombs fell, another kind of battle was being waged, one hidden deep beneath the earth, where men in uniforms and lab coats pursued something far beyond conventional warfare. The Reich complex expanded under SS supervision, funded directly from the Reich Chancellery. Thousands of laborers were brought in from occupied territories, Poles, Czechs, and Soviet prisoners of war. They worked in darkness, carving tunnels through granite, with only whispers of what they were building. Some believed it was an underground city for Hitler himself, others a factory for secret weapons. Few would ever learn the truth. Most wouldn't live long enough to ask. The orders came from Berlin, signed by Himmler and distributed through the SS Construction Group, organization TOD. The phrasing was always vague: advanced research facilities, strategic infrastructure, long-term armament resilience. But beneath the coded language was an unmistakable urgency, a race against time. Allied bombers ruled the skies. Germany's leadership sought salvation underground. In laboratories scattered across the Reich, the brightest minds worked under the threat of punishment and the promise of power. Men like Kurt de Boos, Werner von Braun, and Hans Kammler, engineers who believed technology could redefine destiny. They were men of intellect, not ideology. At least that's what they told themselves. Our work will outlive politics, one of them once wrote in his diary, later recovered from the ruins of Peenemünde. Science cannot be stopped by defeat. It was this belief that fed the Reich project. Documents later found in Soviet archives describe it as a multi-phase development center, involving research into high-pressure energy systems, advanced materials, and propulsion concepts decades ahead of their time. Yet, every report was partially redacted. Every witness vanished. The closer one looks, the more the truth fades into shadow. As the war dragged on, Germany's desperation grew. Cities burned, factories fell silent, but the SS's secret budget, known as the Black Fund, only expanded. Kammler, now in charge of all advanced weapons research, consolidated his power through terror and secrecy. He was the architect of the V2 rocket program, the man behind Auschwitz's industrial design, and the overseer of Riese. To his subordinates, he spoke of a final synthesis, merging physics and engineering into a single weapon that could change the outcome of the war. The Führer demands miracles, he said. We will give him one. Witnesses recalled trains arriving at night, carrying equipment stamped with markings from Peenemünde, the heart of Germany's missile program. Others told of strange crates sealed with lead and marked with radiation warnings. Engineers complained of headaches and burns after exposure to unknown materials. Even the guards grew nervous. Something in those tunnels didn't feel human anymore. It felt industrial, relentless, alive. Then came 1944. The Allies landed in Normandy. The Reich began to crumble. But inside the Alp Mountains, construction didn't stop. In fact, it accelerated. Kammler ordered entire divisions diverted to secure materials. Riese is the future, he declared in a memo dated September 12th. Even if the Reich falls, Riese will stand. It was a statement that read like prophecy or madness. By that time, entire villages near the construction sites had vanished. Locals were relocated under the pretense of national defense. What remained were miles of tunnels, hundreds of workers dying daily, and engineers scribbling notes in code. One recovered document from a Polish resistance courier mentions a spherical chamber, smooth, metallic, powered by cables thicker than a man's arm. Allied intelligence intercepted similar reports but dismissed them as rumor. The chaos of war left little room for myth. In the heart of the complex, something immense was being built. Not a weapon in the traditional sense. No guns, no ammunition. Witness accounts describe magnetic coils, strange turbines, and a central containment sphere surrounded by liquid coolant systems. To this day, historians argue about its purpose. Some say it was a power generator, others, a failed propulsion testbed. But one line from Kammler's final notes remains haunting. If perfected, it will make distance meaningless. As Berlin fell in 1945, the Ries project vanished overnight. Trains were seen departing Silesia, heading south, destination unknown. Kammler himself disappeared, his fate a blank page in history. Officially, he was declared dead. Unofficially, he was last seen boarding an unmarked plane with several sealed crates. The tunnels were flooded, entrances blown apart. The local population was forbidden to approach. Soviet forces soon occupied the region, sealing the area under military control. For decades, nothing surfaced. Files disappeared. Witnesses were silenced. The world forgot about Ries, or perhaps was told to. In the ruins of Europe, nations rebuilt. The scientists who survived found new homes. In the United States, in the Soviet Union, in quiet corners of Argentina. Their work continued under new names, new governments, new flags, and the mountain where Ries slept was left to moss and memory. But history has a way of resurfacing. As the Cold War began, whispers of a lost Nazi energy project found their way into both American and Soviet intelligence. Agents searched quietly, methodically. Satellite photographs revealed sealed tunnels and unusual heat signatures. Nothing conclusive, just enough to keep the curiosity alive. By the 1980s, the region was closed off again, officially for environmental research. In truth, no one wanted anyone looking too closely. The documents that could have explained it were classified or destroyed. Yet every now and then, fragments appeared. A blueprint here, a photograph there, each one adding to the legend of Ries. And so, what began as one man's vision of national rebirth had become something far stranger. A labyrinth of stone and steel that outlived its makers. A riddle buried under history's heaviest silence. An obsession that refused to die, waiting for the day someone would dare to open its doors again. Chapter 3. The Heart of the Mountain. The rain had been falling for days when the Allied scouts first reached the Owl Mountains. It was April 1945, and Germany was collapsing on every front. Columns of refugees crowded the muddy roads, pushing carts filled with whatever pieces of life they could carry. But amid that chaos, one small reconnaissance unit was given an unusual order to investigate reports of abandoned construction near Walim, a site supposedly evacuated by the SS only days before. What they found would later be redacted from most official records. The approach was brutal. Dense forest, steep terrain, and weather that turned every step into a fight. The soldiers expected resistance, pockets of desperate SS or stragglers unwilling to surrender. Instead, they found silence. The villages were empty, the air thick with the stench of burned oil and wet concrete. Then, as the fog thinned, they saw it. A massive steel gate set into the side of the mountain, half concealed by camouflage netting. No signage, no markings, just a number welded into the frame, 27. The team breached the entrance cautiously. Inside, their flashlights revealed walls of smooth concrete stretching into the dark. The ceiling arched like the interior of a cathedral. Rusted scaffolds hung frozen mid-construction. Tools lay scattered across the floor as if dropped in a hurry. And deeper still, the tunnels widened, branching like arteries, some sealed by blast doors, others collapsed by explosives. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. One soldier described hearing a low hum, a vibration beneath the floor. He thought it was machinery still running. Another reported faint lights flickering in a corridor ahead. They advanced carefully, their boots echoing off the concrete, rifles raised. When they reached the central chamber, they stopped. It was a vast room, circular, domed, with a raised platform in the center, surrounded by empty sockets where machines once stood. Cables hung from the ceiling like vines. In the middle sat a spherical structure made of dull metal, scorched and fractured along its seams. The sergeant later said it looked like an engine, or maybe a weapon. None of them could tell. There were markings, symbols, equations, and strange notations scrawled along the walls in chalk. Nearby tables held fragments of glass tubes, melted wiring, and notes written in both German and technical shorthand. Most were illegible, water-damaged beyond saving, but one phrase was still visible on a clipboard near the sphere. Nicht öffnen, unkontrollierte Entladung. Do not open, uncontrolled discharge. They radioed command. Hours passed before any response came. When it did, it was not an order to retrieve, but to secure. A detachment of engineers and intelligence officers arrived by evening. The soldiers were told to remain silent about what they'd seen. The chamber was photographed, samples taken, and the site sealed once again. Officially, it was declared a fuel storage bunker. Unofficially, it became classified under Operation Paperclip's parallel research files, those never intended for public release. Decades later, fragments of that report surfaced. One declassified memo described a residual, electromagnetic signature inconsistent with known technologies of the period. Another mentioned biological traces found on the walls, possibly from laborers exposed to extreme radiation or chemical residue. The documents didn't name the object, only referring to it as device K27-1. Its fate remains unknown, but eyewitness accounts, rare and often whispered long after retirement, tell a more unsettling story. Some say that before the chamber was sealed, one of the engineers managed to power a small generator and connect it to the sphere. The lights in the tunnel flickered, the air vibrated. Then came a brief flash, silent, blinding and cold. Within seconds, the equipment shorted out, and the air filled with the smell of ozone. The engineer reportedly collapsed moments later, his body showing burns without flame. The official report marked it as an electrical accident. His name was never recorded. Meanwhile, miles away, Soviet units closing in from the east received intelligence of German experimental power stations hidden in the mountains. They sent a special detachment of their own, SMERSH agents trained to capture advanced technology before the Allies could. By the time they arrived, the entrances had been blown apart. All that remained was rubble, twisted rebar, and the faint hiss of steam from somewhere below. The Soviets spent weeks combing the site, retrieving what little they could. Everything recovered was shipped to Moscow, catalogued, and locked away in the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, the same institution that later oversaw the USSR's atomic program. And so, for a time, Reese became a ghost, a place whispered about by soldiers and engineers, but never spoken of publicly. Locals avoided it, claiming the ground trembled on still nights, or that their compasses spun near the old entrances. Most dismissed these as folklore, the residue of war stories and fear, but every legend begins with something true. By the early 1950s, parts of the complex were quietly mapped by Polish authorities. Their reports mentioned zones of magnetic interference and abnormal heat signatures in sealed tunnels. Scientists attributed it to groundwater or decaying machinery, but none could explain the repeating pulse detected in the bedrock. A rhythmic signal, faint but steady, like a heartbeat. Years later, during the height of the Cold War, NATO intelligence took notice. Satellite imagery showed a single vent in the forest emitting trace heat long after the tunnels were declared inert. Reconnaissance teams sent to investigate found nothing but broken concrete and collapsed shafts. Still, the readings persisted, unchanged, as if something beneath the mountain refused to die. Those who have seen the classified post-war photographs say the chamber remains intact. The sphere, whatever it was never removed. Every attempt to excavate it ended in equipment failure or unexplained accidents. The last known effort, in 1973, ended when a drilling team lost contact for 2 full minutes. When communication returned, all 5 men insisted they had only been unconscious for a moment, yet their watches showed a time gap of nearly half an hour. Perhaps it was malfunction, perhaps something else. The truth, like the tunnels, remains sealed. But one thing is certain: when the Allied soldiers entered the heart of that mountain in 1945, they uncovered more than a secret facility. They had opened the door to a mystery that neither side of the Iron Curtain would ever fully explain. And even now, as the rain still falls on the Owl Mountains, that rusted gate, marked with the number 27, waits in silence, waiting perhaps for the next sound of footsteps. Chapter 4. Aftermath of Silence. When the war finally ended, the world exhaled, but the breath was shallow, uneasy. Cities lay in ruin, millions were displaced, and the scale of what humanity had done to itself was only beginning to surface. In Silesia, the mountains that once echoed with the roar of dynamite and engines grew quiet again. But silence, as the survivors knew, is never empty. It holds memories of voices, of footsteps, of the dead. The WWII complex remained sealed, now deep within Polish territory. Soviet occupation forces arrived within weeks of Germany's surrender. Their orders were precise: locate and secure all technical assets. Teams of engineers and NKVD officers surveyed the tunnels, their flashlights slicing through dust and cold air. What they found disturbed them. Remnants of vast machinery, blueprints burned beyond recovery, and skeletal remains of workers left where they fell. The smell of oil, decay, and something metallic hung heavy in the air. The Soviets took photographs, logged every discovery, then flooded the chambers. The entrances were buried beneath tons of rock and concrete. Officially, the sites were deemed unsafe and irrelevant. Unofficially, Moscow had already classified them under strategic research acquisition. For decades, nothing moved. Villages rebuilt on the surface. Children played in the woods above, unaware of the labyrinth below. Locals spoke of strange hums that drifted through the ground on quiet nights. Just superstition, they said. But the memory of those who were forced to dig remained. Families of laborers searched for answers that never came. Records were missing. Graves were unmarked. Even decades later, when journalists began tracing survivors, the stories were fragmented, whispered. "They took my husband in 1943, one woman said in an interview years later. "He went into the mountains and never came back. Only his boots were returned." As Europe divided under the shadow of the Cold War, the WWII complex vanished into rumor. The Soviets denied its existence, while NATO intelligence mentioned it only in footnotes. Possible subterranean research site, destroyed 1945, but behind the scenes, files circulated quietly between intelligence circles. Fragments of intercepted communications, sketches of equipment labeled high-voltage containment, reports of anomalies in the magnetic field over the region. The mountain had gone silent, but not dead. In the 1960s, a Polish construction crew accidentally breached part of a sealed tunnel while clearing land for new roads. The air that escaped was cold, sterile, untouched since the war. Officials arrived within hours. The site was cordoned off. The workers were questioned, then dismissed. The incident never appeared in local papers, but one of the men kept a journal. He described finding walls smooth as glass and a faint blue glow before soldiers pushed them back. He never spoke of it again. Meanwhile, across the Iron Curtain, former German scientists now working for the United States began to surface in classified reports. Some had been part of Kammler's network. They built rockets, missiles, and jet engines that defined modern warfare. Yet, when asked about WWII, they always deflected. One, when pressed, simply said, "It wasn't meant to be a weapon. It was meant to change everything." His statement was struck from the transcript. By the 1980s, the site was forgotten by most, a relic of a darker time. But history has a way of resurfacing when least expected. Local explorers, drawn by rumor, began venturing into sealed tunnels. They found remnants of steel supports, strange circular imprints in the concrete, and faded warning symbols in German script. A few made it deep enough to find one of the inner chambers. One of them, years later, would describe what he saw. It was quiet, too quiet. The air was thick, heavy, like it didn't belong there. On the wall, someone had written in chalk, Wird wiederkommen. He will return. The Polish government closed the entrances soon after. Unofficially, radiation levels were cited as the cause. No official report was ever released. The explorers who went deepest refused to talk again. One developed chronic illness soon after. Another vanished altogether. Through the 1990s and into the new millennium, fragments of the story resurfaced. Declassified British files hinted at intercepted SS communications concerning subterranean research. Soviet records referenced recovered experimental coils transferred to secret institutes. And then, in 2016, a team of geologists surveying the area for mineral analysis detected an anomaly, a perfect void more than 60 meters below the surface, in a region previously believed to be solid rock. The data matched no known tunnel layout. When they returned a month later, the instruments malfunctioned. Their readings were wiped. The anomaly disappeared. For those who study such history, WWII remains a wound that never fully healed. Not because of what is known, but because of what isn't. Thousands died building something no one can name. A project so secret that its purpose was buried along with its victims. And in that silence, we find the most haunting truth of all, that the line between innovation and destruction, between genius and madness, was thinner than anyone dared to admit. Standing at the mountain's base today, it's easy to forget what happened here. The trees have grown back. The rivers run clear. Tourists walk trails above ground, unaware that beneath their feet lie corridors of forgotten ambition, a monument to human obsession. But sometimes, when the wind shifts and the forest goes still, locals say you can hear it again. A faint rhythmic pulse deep below, like a machine remembering that it once lived. And perhaps, in that quiet heartbeat, the past whispers its warning that some knowledge, once unearthed, refuses to stay buried. Chapter 5. The Weight of What Remains. Today, the tunnels of Rees rest beneath layers of moss and time, their entrances sealed, their blueprints scattered across archives that still carry blacked-out lines. Yet for historians, researchers, and survivors' families, the story never truly ended. It lingers, not as myth, but as an unfinished sentence in the history of human ambition and fear. The discovery made in 2019, when archaeologists uncovered a fragment of machinery deep under WWII, reignited questions thought long settled. The fragment was small, a section of alloy unlike any known wartime metal, and etched with markings identical to those documented by Allied intelligence in 1945. Tests confirmed it was genuine. Once again, the past forced its way into the present. News outlets called it a window into Hitler's lost lab. But to those who had studied the project for decades, it was something far more personal. Proof that the story they'd chased through rumor and silence was real. The researchers, who descended into the reopened shaft, described the air as metallic, stale, and heavy. Floodlights cut through decades of darkness, revealing chambers shaped like cathedrals of concrete. The walls still bore the imprint of wooden forms, and on some, faint German script survived. Orders, measurements, warnings. Nicht berühren, do not touch. Beneath a collapsed archway, they found remnants of copper wiring bundled with cloth, leading toward a sealed section of tunnel they could not breach. The deeper they went, the more the mountain seemed to absorb their voices. Every sound echoed as if answered. Standing there, one archaeologist whispered that it felt like walking inside an idea, something vast, incomplete, and dangerous. In a way, she was right. The Rees complex was never just about weapons. It was about control of energy, of fear, of destiny. The men who conceived it believed technology could rewrite the limits of humanity itself. What they built instead became a tomb for that belief. As the excavation continued, the old questions returned. What was the device found in Chamber 27? Was it an experiment in propulsion? Or something deeper? An attempt to harness forces even its creators barely understood? Historians now see it as a mirror of its age, a time when science was enslaved by ideology, when progress became a tool of destruction. The evidence suggests Riese was meant to outlast the war, to carry the Reich's vision into whatever came next. But when the Reich collapsed, so did the meaning of the work itself. All that remained were corridors leading nowhere. For the survivors of the labor camps forced to dig those tunnels, remembrance carries its own weight. Every year, families gather near the mountain's base to light candles. They do not speak of machines or theories. They speak of names, fathers, brothers, children who never returned. In their silence lies the only truth that matters. That, whatever Rees was meant to achieve, it cost human lives to build. The rest is speculation. In recent years, governments have begun to release fragments of files once deemed too sensitive. They reveal no great weapon, no breakthrough technology, only evidence of confusion, desperation, and cruelty wrapped in secrecy. The scientists argued, the generals demanded results, and thousands suffered for a project no one fully understood. The irony is cruel. In their search for ultimate control, the architects of Rees created only loss. Still, curiosity persists. Filmmakers, divers, and amateur historians keep returning to the mountain, drawn by its silence. They lower cameras into flooded shafts, scan walls for hidden passages, and recover artifacts that tell fragments of a larger story. Every discovery, no matter how small, carries both thrill and dread. The feeling that something powerful sleeps just beyond reach. But perhaps that's what Reese truly is now. Not a physical machine, but an echo. A reminder of how far humanity will go when fear and vision walk hand in hand. If you visit today, you'll find no guards, no signs of danger, only trails that wind through quiet forests, birdsong carried over the wind, and the faint smell of wet stone. Yet stand still long enough, and you can almost sense it, the weight beneath your feet, the cold breath of tunnels below. In those moments, history feels close enough to touch, and still just beyond understanding. As dusk settles over the Owl Mountains, light fades from the ridges, and the forest swallows the last echoes of the day, what remains is the same silence that began this story. Patient, watchful, eternal. The war ended long ago, but its secrets never truly surrendered. Beneath the soil of Silesia lies more than steel and concrete. It holds our reflection of ambition unrestrained, of progress without conscience, of what happens when the pursuit of power becomes an end in itself. And so the mountain endures, a monument to everything humanity tried to forget. Somewhere in its depths, the rusted doors of Chamber 27 remain closed, the air unmoving. Perhaps they will stay that way forever. Or perhaps, someday, someone will open them again and listen to what the silence has been waiting to say.